Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumi, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the founder of Painter Bros, Zach Tanner. Zach, how are you today?
Hey, doing pretty good for a Monday, Frank. Thanks for having me on.
It is pretty good for a Monday, right? So Zach, tell us about Painter Bros. I'd love to hear kind of why this whole thing started.
Well, it was, I guess I started when I was 19 years old or so. I didn't want a boss, and I thought, just probably like every other 18-year-old thinks, that you know how to do it better than the last guy that did it. And so I didn't know what I didn't know and kind of jumped in and started working first as the painter and painted a bunch of houses, some buildings, and then grew it into what it is today over about a decade of work.
That's crazy. Did you have a passion for painting, or you literally just didn't want to work for anybody? Like, why painting?
I mean, I wasn't like born with this desire to be a professional painter. Like, I didn't aspire to like, woohoo, I'm going to go do construction. But no, I was a quarterback in high school and super engaged in sports. And I ended up getting hurt my senior year, and I had some scholarship opportunities that went away. I had to have surgery, and I kind of made a choice. I scribbled down some math on a piece of paper one day and thought, what if I bet on myself instead of go to college and maybe ride the pine for 3 years while I recover. So yeah, that was kind of the deciding factor of what made me do it. I didn't really like college. I didn't really like school. I always learned by doing. I was not I'm a good listener, but that's just not how I learn. I have to go do it physically. And so I knew I was good at it. I had some family that were in the trades. And so that gave me kind of a step up. The guys at 5-Star Franchising, there's some family of mine that helped start the 5-Star painting brand. And that was kind of my initial into the industry.
Okay, so there was some franchising pedigree that you came from.
A little more than most, probably.
Yeah, I was going to say that's awfully advanced for a 19-year-old to say, I'm going to bet on myself. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it now, it's a lot more amazing than it felt then. Just thinking about my choices. I didn't have anything to lose then. Of course. Yeah. I had $400,
Right. I was in a business strategy meeting with some guys who I highly look up to. And one of the conclusions the group came back with is that when we were younger, and recommendation to young people is take more risk, because why not? If you don't do it in your 20s, or in your case, when you're 19, you're never going to do it. Potentially, or it's harder to do it, of course, when you're in your 30s and 40s, just, life changes and stuff, but take more risk when you're young. You can bounce back, you can pivot, you can try new things, find out what works, what doesn't work. So I imagine then, since you had family in the trades, you were encouraged, or I should say you were not discouraged, to go into this business and go into your own business starting out so young. Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, I think that was a big part of it when I was a kid. So I graduated high school in 2012. And so I was in high school 2008 to 2012. And if you can imagine trying to get a job from 2008 to 2012 while we were in this big downturn recession, it was impossible. And I was smart enough, I was capable enough, but I couldn't get a job to save my life. So the way I earned money growing up was I would go knock on doors and ask people if I could mow their lawns, clean their pools, and I get a little book of business going. So my mom, my dad, my family, they're all entrepreneurs at heart. They all own their own businesses, own practices. Franchising, having an in with franchising helped do that part. But I think fundamentally, I was very fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of free thinkers.
Well, before we get to the 40 franchise locations in 25 states. I want to stick with this journey of yours starting out. So what was life like when you first started this business? I have a lot of aspiring and emerging founders that watch and listen to the show. So I'd love for you to kind of take us back to your, humble beginnings on what life was like, and why do you think it worked?
I think it worked because I made it work. And I think that's the choice that every entrepreneur is faced with. Like when you're building a business, it's very rare that your plan goes exactly as planned. And so every time you have to pivot, some people think of that pivoting moment as failure. I failed at my plan. Am I going to quit or am I going to move on? And I think that fundamentally, if you digest it and set the right expectation, knowing that you're going to have to pivot, you're going to have to adjust, you're going to have to change, you're never failing, you're just learning and growing. And so I think once I started to grasp that mentality of expecting challenges, expecting speed bumps, and being ready to pivot, that made it not easy, but a lot easier, because I had the same end goal of what I wanted to do, and I was still accomplishing my little goals along the way instead of feeling beat up along the way. So yeah, that's probably the base of it.
That's that's the makings of a winner right there. I think too many folks get caught up in when they start a business, they make a decision and they think they have to stick to it, and then they hear, well, you have to, you have to have grit, you have to grind, which all those things are right, but they miss the part about the ability to pivot and to be flexible and making changes. You're not going rogue, and it's okay to change your mind. And I think what happens sometimes, and I think the reason why so many business owners fail, or even franchise founders fail, is that they think because their model started a certain way, this is the way it needs to be. And then they get caught up. People make bad decisions, they make mistakes, and then they're afraid to make another decision. And that's like the worst thing you can do, is be afraid to make another decision. And for you to do that at an early age, it's super impressive, because what you essentially are telling the audience of what you did was you were anticipating, and there's nothing more powerful than that. You anticipated that you were going to have a challenge and you were okay with it, versus getting hit in the face and being reactive. Of course, we don't know what problem is going to occur and what's going to come next, but the ability to, I guess the best way to say it is your ability to absorb it. It's almost like you absorbed it and you were able to, bounce back or bounce off of it. And that's not something that people do, especially at a young age. So that's amazing. What do you think? What do you think was a special moment for you as a young business owner, that you had this, maybe was it a moment in time or a certain book of business where you realized that you were really onto something with great potential?
Yeah, I guess when I would try and explain what I was doing to people and they didn't get it the first 2 times or even 3 times I tried to explain it to them, I realized I'd created something that couldn't be fathomed without a lot of education explaining, and which means it's not easily accessible or understandable to someone who's trying to get involved in business. So if that makes sense, it's kind of like I climbed enough rungs on the ladder to create distance from entry-level business. And so, a few years ago, as I started doing more of the national accounts business, the franchising side, I mean, there's still people I could tell what I do maybe 5 times to them, and they're like, I don't get it. That sounds amazing. I don't get it. And I was like, but it feels good to know that, yeah, I know where I'm at, and I can help people get there.
Well, why don't you tell us exactly then what does Painter Bros do? I just assume that you guys do residential painting or maybe commercial, but what makes you guys so different?
Well, we do a lot of, we do residential work. We're probably 80 to 90% of our work is commercial. When I started, it was 100% residential back in 2014, 15, right around there. And I was growing the business. I grew it to a few $1 million, just locally here in Utah. By the time I was like, I don't know, 20, 22 or so. And what I noticed was this trend, because I'm a data guy, I work off of numbers. And I noticed that it was so expensive to acquire work the cost per customer acquisition was like 20%, maybe 25% sometimes. And if you think about it, if it's $25 out of every $100 of revenue you make just goes to getting the job, it takes a lot of time to scale that kind of business. And so that made me want to pivot into something that had a lower cost per customer acquisition and more of a long-term relationship, sustainable business model. And that type of a business is relationship based. And it's about people caring about people, helping people. And so I had to adjust my mentality from transaction based, like quick close, quick sale, to relationship, long-term. How can I be a part of someone's life, for lack of better words, or part of their actual business? And so that was how we got into commercial. You got to really show someone they can trust you. You're going to be the same guy tomorrow that you are today. You're not just there blowing smoke. And so that's kind of been our secret sauce, I guess, is we're not transactional. We're huge on culture, relationship building, long-term relationships. And that's how we get a lot of our customers. Is we do what we say we're going to do for the long term. And a lot of our deals take 18 months, 24 months to happen, but we're there for it.
What's amazing is that everything you just said, Zach, you could apply to literally any product or service, right? You're talking about being the relationship business and the importance of, developing it. And this has nothing to do with painting, which I tell people this all the time. Whatever business you're in, it never has anything to do with the actual product. It has to do with, a deeper meaning. It has to do with your why, like what's important to you. Because you're talking about culture here and how you do business. And that's, I think, a great lesson for people who are maybe starting out, or they have a passion for, I don't know, baking, and they want to open a bakery. Well, you don't open a bakery because, you just love baking. It's, what is your business about? What do you want it to look like? Who do you want your customers to be? And what kind of relationship do you want to have? It's not a surprise to me that you've had this tremendous amount of success, because I would imagine that when people think of a painting franchise, they think, well, okay, it's painting. Like, why should I get involved in a franchise that's painting? Why do I need them? And we're going to get to that here momentarily, because I'm sure you've gotten that question before. Before we get into franchising, my last question for you before we go to that part of the journey, if you had to start all over, is there anything that you would have done differently when you started out?
I'm pretty happy with where I am now. And I think, everything I went through made me who I am and made the business what it is. But I think I probably could have pivoted a little bit sooner into that relationship building mentality. I probably hung on to it for a year, maybe 18 months longer than I needed to.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so what made you ultimately decide to franchise? When did that come about?
Oh, I started the business to franchise it. That was my whole goal. I actually franchised it for the first time, like did all the paperwork and all that jazz in 2017, and I sold 3 franchises. I think it was 3, maybe 4, just organically.
Okay.
And I learned what I didn't know pretty quickly, and so I stopped. I had 3 or 4, and then there was just enough unorganized chaos that made me realize, reel it back in. You just learn something, rebuild it, or build it better, and launch it again when you're ready. So yeah, fundamentally, I read a book called the EMyth when I was like 18. I don't know if you've read that book. It's a good book.
It is my favorite book. That is the one book that I tell people it's a must read. And I gave it out to every single person that came to my franchise discovery day, whether you became a franchisee or not. You got an EMyth book. I love it. I love it. So that was a game changer for you, huh?
Yeah, I read that book. That helped me digest the I guess the psychology behind business ownership. And I think it was one other book, but mostly that one. It was, if you're building a business, even if you're not going to franchise it, build it as if you're going to franchise it, because it's all about systems and replication. And so that was a big part of it.
Well, I give you a lot of kudos there and respect for the fact that when you franchised early on, you realized that I didn't have everything together. I need to pause. A lot of people would have just kept going with that and said, oh, well, we got casualties of me not knowing what to do. And we're just going to keep blowing through it. But you took a pause, which I give you a lot of big kudos on that. That's fantastic. So what happened then with those 3 franchises? Did they continue? Did you end the agreements? What happened next?
I bought 2 of them back, and the other ones, part of my learning what I didn't know was I had some people stealing and doing some frowned upon activities. And so those other 2 ended not necessarily in flames, but not the way anyone would want to. So lack of controls. Yeah.
Dude, it's happened to all of us. I hate to say it. I don't want to call it a rite of passage of franchising, but
sort of is.
it has happened to many of us, including me. Yeah. I remember when the first time it happened to me, my lawyer said, welcome to franchising. Now you're official. And I was like, really? That was his initial response. I'm like, come on, man. That's not what I wanted to hear. But yeah, it's true. Well, that's great. I'm glad you had that. Unfortunately, you had that experience, but clearly 40 franchise openings in 25 states later, you figured it out when you went back the second time around.
Yeah, I think we're in a really good place, and I don't know if anyone will ever know everything, but we've got enough of a leg up now and some really positive momentum to keep learning and keep building and growing off of what we have right now, and it's pretty exciting.
Nice. There's like 4,000 franchise opportunities out there. So what do you think has been your secret to your success on how you've attracted people, especially in the painting industry where folks are probably like, okay, well, there are other painting franchises out there. Why you? Why are they going to Painter Bros?
I think we're the only ones that do the national account, working with Fortune 500 companies as our foundation for our business. And there's not a lot of people that know how to do that. We get a lot of applicants, and kind of to circle back around to the whole culture and relationship building part, we don't accept a lot. I think last year we had like 550 franchise applicants, and we only signed like 22 or 24, and we don't sell them. To be honest with you, we do a lot of vetting and a lot of making sure that this is what they want to do instead of us wanting them to do it. Part of that long-term relationship culture building part. But I think as people get involved in the company, they start to understand that, and it resonates well.
Fair enough. If you had to think back to, your 40 is it 40 franchisees or 40 franchise locations?
The franchisees, I think we have like 130 or 40 total locations now, but yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. What's the kind of person that thrives in your system? If you had to think about those common threads of your most successful franchise owners, what's the common threads of those folks?
Self-starters and individuals who are great at managing relationships. So, just going back to the whole culture thing again, it's really people who've gotten to a place in life because they've been really well known. They've been great communicators, great networkers, trustworthy people that are reliable, do the right thing when no one's looking. The work we do on the commercial side, you do a lot of it when no one's looking, and then you'll get a review a year later from your client going back and checking all the work you did. And so that whole do the right thing when no one's looking part really comes into play. You can't really take shortcuts and get away with it.
When it comes to training and support, how much of it is actual painting versus the business of painting?
That we do ourselves is probably 90% the business of painting, maybe 95% the business of painting. We have all of our franchisees take a course. AMPP is the organization. It's like a commercial coatings inspector qualification course. It's pretty robust. So we have them all take that, and that's more of the actual application side of it. But it's really mostly based around running the business, managing the relationships, and finding the right people to outsource that part of your business to.
Okay, and what's the investment range to open a location?
It's anywhere from 150,000 up to 500,000, depending on how many territories.
Based on, is that territory size? Is that what makes that widespread?
Yep. Yeah, there's a few different options. We do have some owner operators that really just want to buy one territory, go work their area. They don't really have the aspiration to go network and try and work with their own national account customer. They'd rather just have work fed to them and do their own thing. And so it's kind of a smaller territory purchase. But then we have some other individuals who C-level background or, high business acumen who want to expedite that opportunity to get some face time and some interactions with Fortune 500 customers. That's a bit more training on our end, a bit more conference networking that us as the franchisor need to get involved in. And so that's why we tier it up to $500,000 to cover all those costs.
If you had to choose kind of on the going forward, growing wise, what's the type of franchise owner you'd want? Do you want the manager operated or the owner operated?
Yes, I think it takes both. You don't want it to be top heavy necessarily with everyone trying to be in charge of everything. I think that there's really a healthy balance of both where, I've seen it with my corporate location where we get a big project, maybe for Simon Malls or something like that. And being able to send that to someone who isn't distracted or doesn't have a bunch of stuff going on in their local market is advantageous to us because they can just focus on that job specifically for 3 months and be happy about it.
Okay. What about the markets? How do you decide what markets you want to be in?
We look at historical data and we look at our previous year's workload in different markets. So we're in every state every day for business, mostly commercial, but we do have a lot of residential leads that go unserviced. And so we look at that data and then we see which parts of the country do we have the most work or the most opportunity in that we didn't have a franchisee located in at that time. Then we'll go and push the sale of that franchise territory to help grow our footprint. Or if we have potential needs of a customer coming up where they ask us to cover more of the US, then we'll start pushing those areas more.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And in terms of how big is big, or where do you think this thing is going to be over the next, 5 years, 10 years? What are your aspirations, or what do you envision?
Oh, you're asking a dreamer's dreams. I always have the pushback of, well, what's realistic? And I'm like, I have no idea what's realistic. I just know what I can dream up. But I would love to make this thing $1 billion business in the next 5 years. There's a few things we're doing right now that I think could get us there. A lot of work, obviously, but I think we're pointed in the right direction.
That's great. Well, it's the people who are unrealistic that make the magic happen, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Unrealistic goals.
Yep. What's that saying? You shoot for the moon, you land on the stars, or shoot for the stars, land on the moon, something like that.
Something like that. Exactly. Yeah. Are there any trends or anything that you've seen change? You've been in this business, 10 years now, right? Anything that's changed for you in terms of trends that you're seeing in the industry or customer wants and needs that have evolved?
On like franchising specifically, or like the painting industry?
Like in the painting industry, like your customer, are you seeing a different type of customer need that has changed? I'm just curious on how your business has evolved in terms of how you're servicing folks.
Yeah, I think that there's a new demographic that is now a homeowner. I'm probably part of that newer demographic. And I think in a large way, it's shifting from being totally digital to more of a networking or in-person opportunity. When I first started, it was almost entirely digital. Like it was just Google ads or lead generators, this and that. And I think that over the last decade, it's somewhat soured the consumer experience in a few ways. And so I think that it's moving more to that. How can I buy services in a different way? There's a desire for it.
Okay, fair enough. Zach, what about legacy? I'm a big legacy guy. I believe, when we're doing a business, I think of business as like a spiritual game personally. And I'm just curious, since you've been doing this so long and you've been so thoughtful, what kind of legacy do you want to leave with this brand?
I think that as anyone like builds themselves or builds their way into life or their position in life, you're always searching for like, what was my, maybe not everyone, but me, like I'm searching for like, what was my contribution or what was my impact? And did I use all my skills and everything I was blessed with in the right way, or did I take advantage of the right situations? And so I would want a meaningful enough contribution that showed people a new way to do something and created the next step for another entrepreneur to take. Like use what I did as almost a stepping stone to keep progressing.
Absolutely. Well, you're doing that, right? I mean, in so many ways where you have franchise owners that you're teaching them the right way of doing business that otherwise they wouldn't have done. Everything you said earlier about culture and leadership and relationship building, those are things that you've given people a gift for your business on how they're going to do business. And it's a ripple effect on the people that they have and people who are in their lives that may not be afraid to start a business as a result of them owning a franchise, just as your family was involved in 5-Star and you started out. It's, I think the ripple effect that we all have in business goes far beyond what our original dream is when we just say, hey, I don't want to work for somebody. You could never have imagined as a 19-year-old kid where you are today, I would imagine, right? You've got to be pinching yourself at some point.
Pitching, slapping myself, trying to wake up again.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Zach, what about now? Tell me why is now like a great time for franchisees to join your system? You got a lot to be excited about.
Right now is a good time because we have a lot of runway. I think that at least the way I built this company, it's a really large foundation and that's the hardest part to build. And I feel like we've done a really good job building that. We've got a lot of really good people on the team. We've got a lot of really good customers, and now we need the right people to help us continue that growth.
Awesome. Well, if someone was interested in learning more about Painter Bros, where would they go?
Just go to our website. There's a pretty easy form fill on our website. We've got a great Fran Dev person, Jen Olson. She knocks it out of the park and she could help them out.
Awesome. All right. I got one last question for you. I end every podcast with the franchise tip jar because the franchise community is so generous with sharing of tips and tricks and strategies and stuff. And Zach, since you're part of that, franchise legacy, with your family and all, I know this one's in your wheelhouse. If a friend came to you and they wanted to be a franchisee of another business, another brand altogether, what would be a piece of advice you'd give them to making sure they're choosing correctly, they're making a right decision?
I would say just be yourself and look for someone that's being themselves. If you're being salesy or the other side's being salesy, it's not going to be the best relationship. So just be candid at all times, be yourself, and the right organization or the right company will, present themselves to you.
Awesome. What I hear you say, if I was the person you were giving the advice to, I hear you loud and clear. You're talking about authenticity, like making sure not only am I being myself, but are they really being authentic, or are they just trying to sell me a franchise? Because you got to sniff that out. It's pretty easy too.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly.
You can tell when you're being sold.
Yes.
Awesome. Zach, thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate it. And I wish you all the best and continued success.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate you.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.